Welcome to everybody. I'm so happy to have you all here today. So most of you already know me. I'm Julie Zazada. I'm the Executive Director here at the Cedar Lake Historical Association. Very happy to have you all here today. This is actually our 6th year of these wintertime programs. We used to call it the History Roadshow when we were going out to other places in the community. Then we got some heat in here. We had to bring the program back home because no one would let us come to their venue for a couple of years in a row. So we're keeping it. This year it's called the Winter Speaker Series since we're not out on the road. We're going to explore the lives and the stories of regional significance. So as you can see on the screen, or if you got your handout, we have the program, let's see here, December 4th. Samuel Love is actually going to come back and he's going to screen his short film, Calumet the Region's River, and then we're going to actually have a discussion about that topic, because this is funded through the Indiana Humanities. Nick Nantis will come back in January, and we're going to talk about Gene Shepherd. I think most of you Regionites are very well aware of who Gene Shepherd is, so we're going to learn about, that's the person who, the man who had written, the Christmas Story film was based on his writings. And then February 5th, Joseph Pete, who is a Times newspaper reporter, wrote this book on Secret Indiana, A Guide to the Weird, Wonderful, and Obscure of Northwest Indiana. So he's going to talk about his book. And March 5th, I'm almost certain Dr. Kenneth Schoon will be here that day to talk about his new book on George Pullman. So we have lots scheduled here for this winter. So again, I recognize many of you as association members, and those who are not, hopefully you'll become members here soon. Let's do a super quick recap of the most amazing season that we've ever had, okay? So if you came out in April and May, you were here for Water Race, we had the big Smithsonian exhibition. Then on May 7th, 101st anniversary, we christened Baby Dewey that day and gave our B. Horner Award to our historian Scott Boca. Our visitorship this year was up by 29%. That's a lot. We're excited. So I want to thank you guys for inviting people, bringing people out and everything. And we cannot forget our first season of steamboat rides all summer long, which again, I met and saw a lot of you on those rides this year. And that leads to our next announcement. We are completely thrilled to share that our steamboat project has now won 3 awards. So we have our National Award from the American Association for State and Local History. We just won a state award from Indiana Historical Society for the Outstanding Collaborative Project. So that was for recognition of our partnership with the Hesston Steam Museum. And this Thursday I will be in Maryville receiving the award for Team Innovation from the Society of Innovators at Purdue Northwest. So again, Hesston and Cedar Lake Historical Association received that award for their partnership and pulling off this whole Steam Through History project. So we're really, really excited about all that. But that's not all. Just yesterday, I was up at the Field Museum where we opened the Calumet Voices National Stories 4th phase of the exhibit. So for those of you who remember a couple of years back, our artifacts went up to the Gary Library and were on display with several other Lake County historical libraries and societies. And that ended up being basically lockdown started, right? We opened that January of 2020 and it got locked down like a month later for 2 years. And so that exhibition wasn't even able to be viewed. But we knew that the final was going to be going up to the Field Museum, and we were very happy to see that yesterday it opened up. So now for about the next year, not quite, our artifacts are going to be on display helping to tell the story of the Calumet region in the Field Museum. So you have to make a field trip up to Chicago to go check all of that out. So final reminder before we get started, the gift shop's open, so if anyone needs a t-shirt or a book or a postcard. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Glad to see so many bright, smiley faces. I was on the steamboat ride this year, and it was like 110.
But not when you're on the water. It's much cooler when you're moving on the water.
Yeah, on
right?
the water. And this was our 2nd year. So, and we were glad that we got to go all around. So, yeah, looking forward to next year, too. I'm a retired teacher. I was a elementary teacher for like 35 years. Hammond, Gary, Portage, New Albany, Kentucky, Vermont, all over the place. And now I teach over at IU, not in the education department, in the arts and science. And I get kids ready for college. It's called Getting Ready for Academic Success. So I'm still busy and writing books. And my husband, John DeMakas, he used to have Nino's Pizza in Miller, if you ever went to Nino's. Okay, well, anyhow, he's retired. He ended up doing something different in Blue Island, a whole different business. He has 2, I have 3. Most of them are married, so we have 9. And they're all great. So that brings you up to date. And most of my books are available on Amazon.com. So I have 4 children's books that are picture books, for a picture. And then I just brought out a beginning chapter book. And it's about when my family moved to Cincinnati in the 50s for 6 weeks and our experience there. And so that's, you'll be able to read about that in the news too, because I'm going to be launching that book. But I was very excited that Julie was open to the idea of me coming and doing my Gene Stratton-Porter, a visit with Gene Stratton-Porter, one-woman traveling show, kind of like what she was saying, traveling show. And I just have to say, before I get into her character, that my daughter was working on her master's in California in education, and she wanted to do a series of documentaries about women writers in Indiana, and so she picked Gene Stratton-Porter. So we went over to her different houses, which are now museums, and we made a documentary, which I will give the link to Julie, so that if you want to see it. It's about 10 minutes long. But when since she lived in Hollywood, she interviewed the people at her church that were in the film industry. And they all knew about Gene Stratton-Porter because she was not only here, she was also in Hollywood. And so we visited all the houses and videotaped it, you know, and then she handed it and got a real good grade. So. Okay, so I am considered, okay, I gotta do this. All right. So I want to thank you for braving the elements to spend your afternoon with me, Geneva Grace Stratton, and I would like you to suspend reality at this moment and suggest that we all use our imaginations. Let's pretend we are in Hollywood in the Roaring 20s. I understand that the Roaring 20s happened in here. There was a meeting, some kind of an evening where everybody dressed like the 20s. Pretend like you're in drop waist dresses with boas, and the men are in zoot suits with fedoras. It's 1922 when I launched a poetry book called The Firebird, and to such an audience as you, including a Native American interpreting my words in sign language. And I was so happy at this point in my life. It was my true rags to riches story. But now on with the show. I'm a Hoosier writer known mostly for Girl of the Limberlost. Someone has that over here, don't you? Yeah, I've got like a thinner version with small print. You've got the nice kind. Yeah. This one is hard to read. Yeah, the girl. So that's what I'm most known for. And if you don't remember me, it's because I passed away in 1924, so it's been 98 years. But I figured Mark Twain published his autobiography 100 years after he passed away. He wanted to make sure everybody was dead before he did. I can do this and share my life with my gentle Hoosier, my gentle fellow Hoosiers. So I was born in 1863, around the Civil War, not far from Fort Wayne. Let me see if I can do this. Oh, this is a picture of me in my 40s. That's when I started to write, in my 40s. So it's never too late. And I have a map here. Adams, Wabash, not far from Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne's right there. So this is all kind of around where I lived. So, my life was cut short though in 1924 when I was only 61 years old because my Lincoln was hit by an out-of-control streetcar in Hollywood. And over my lifetime, over 10 million books were sold, 25 million readers internationally. That's what this is. Internationally. And my books are interpreted in many languages. So, okay. Okay, so I was famous at the time. Some people say I had a Cinderella life, and you can see for yourself. Okay, so, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. First I'll show you, this is what I love to do, sit in nature. I just love nature so much. I would just drink it in. And you can see there's an owl and a bird up there, and a raccoon and a deer. There may be other animals. And there's also a lot of trees and plants. That was what I liked. And this shows me, this is a photograph. These photographs are from the Indiana Historical Museum. Okay, I could let you know that. I just, and that's me. I can't tell, but I think that's a butterfly. I'm after something. Or a moth. And this is me at 10 years old. I have a lot of hair. These are my parents. They're not smiling because you had to not smile back then. You know, you had to keep everything open for a long time, the lens. But Mark is my father and Mary is my mother. And they migrated from Ohio to the Wabash River Valley in the 1840s. My father was infected with Wabash fever after hearing the tales of the verdant valley. And on his exploratory trip to the banks of the Wabash, the rattlesnakes were so thick that settling was out of question. So we moved nearby to Kosciuszko, on 160 acres with 4 children at the time. My parents cleared the land, they hunted, they lived through a winter that was so cold the animals froze. And Mark used bushels of corn and grain as currency for land speculation and sold large parcels of his land near the house. And in 1852, he amassed enough money, he bought 82 acres with a huge farmstead and a public cemetery near Largo. And he became inspired to build a church near the cemetery. So he went to Greencastle, to Asbury College, and became an ordained Methodist preacher. So that's called thrifty in my book. So my father was a charismatic speaker. He possessed a rich oratory. He memorized the Bible, parts of the Bible, poetry, and literature, and he taught us from the front porch. His dream was to have one of his children, at least one, become a writer. And a neighbor recalls the time the first train came tearing past, and my father told the man what was going on. And the man said if Mark hadn't been there, he would have shot that train from fear. Another one of my father's honors was that from 1858 to 1863, he was the Wabash City Commissioner. So my parents had a dozen children in all, and I was the youngest. They all did pretty well, but Laddie loved me the most, and he was 8 years older than me. So let's see what's next here. Okay, I always liked owls, so there's a little place I was born. So I was born in August 17th, 1863, and my mother suffered from typhoid of the spine, which she caught nursing her older son back to health. So she was bedridden most of my life, until her death when I was 12 in 1875. So you can see my infancy was tough, especially with a sick mother. However sick she was, my mother taught all of us how to run the house, which is a lot, how to cook, bake, sew, clean, garden, and even take care of the chickens. So I'm getting ahead of myself again. You might say I was an unwanted baby, but actually I loved being outside. They would plop me down in the pasture while everybody was working, and I became friends with all the animals. And I became in touch with the rhythm of nature. Like I saw the birds lay eggs and have fledglings and grow up and fly away. I became very aware of them. One of my first memories, though, was my brothers shot a woodpecker for target practice. That's what they used to do back then. And also they didn't want it to eat the cherries. So my dad, that's when I learned about death. And I promised my father I would never eat another cherry if they would stop shooting birds. Something my father taught me was if I was very quiet, he even put a little handkerchief around my mouth, I could watch a hummingbird and her nest. And then my mother taught me, I did these drawings, by the way. And I experimented, like this is charcoal, you know, pastels, and it was actually very little picture. I'm like, it's going to be on the computer, you know. So my mother taught me that, she said, see that egg cracking right there? She said, it's not gonna open up now because the rooster is crowing so loud it's scaring the bird inside. So I learned all kinds of interesting things on the ranch. So this is a picture of my house, which was right near the Limberlost Swamp. The Limberlost Swamp was named that way because a man named Jim got lost there in the limber. And people, some geographers or cartographers came by and they wanted to know what was that called, and they said, well, that's where a guy named Jim got lost, so they called it the Limberlost Swamp. So that's how they got its name. At our house, I had a white bantam hen. I always had moths and butterflies. I had a blue jay. I made a tuxedo. See, that's why I have this here. And a top hat, because I like to dress my animals. And you can see the cherry trees, the catalpa, and in the back, there's the cemetery. And so I was so engrossed in nature that when I was telling my father about the rhythm of nature, he took me to the doctor and had my head examined. And the doctor proclaimed me as gifted. So, and then the day that I threw myself in front of Daddy's gun to block the bullet that was meant for the wounded hawk, that's how that hawk became. I say hawk because my dad was from Kansas, and he became one of my pets. That's when he gave up and he decided the only recourse was to put me in charge of the wildlife. And that's when I became the queen of the Limberlost. And I was the happiest when I became the protector and the caretaker of nature. All birds, animals, flowers, plants, and trees became my special domain. And, oh, this is cute. This is, see, yeah, see? I loved all the seasons, and here I am in all my glory. This is a little anecdote about Laddie and I. We were walking home in a stream, and these little ducklings from the nearby farm started following us. And so we picked them up, you know, and then we let them follow us. We got home, and my mom said, take them back to the farm. So then we had to do the same thing, going back. And we had a lot of fun. And then this is a picture. Wait a minute, did I skip? I think I skipped something. There. No. Oh, I gotta go arrow back. There it is. This is a picture of me in my father's study. He brought Queen Anne's furniture all the way from Ohio to our house. And that's me sitting in his chair reading his gigantic books. And that's where I got my good ideas for plot, setting, theme, character development, was from classics. That's all they had back then. Okay, so then I started to want to draw and write. And so my father sold some corn, and he bought me an easel and paints, which I still use today, the same easel. And he got me art lessons. So that's how he's looking after us. And then this is me at high school. I hated school. I hated shoes. I just wanted to be out in nature. And in Fort Wayne, I think they had a school system similar to downtown Gary, you know, with the auditorium and you know how it used to be, the Woodway. Okay, so I was supposed to come into the auditorium and talk about mathematics, which I hated. And so I waited till the very last minute, and I showed up, and I started talking about this book that I loved about an Italian count who was imprisoned, and he saw a little teeny plant growing in between some rocks in the courtyard, and it turned into this beautiful flower, and he fell in love with the flower. It was a tragic love story. And so everybody stood up, and they applauded, and they brought in the principal and the superintendent. That was my only good day. Other than that, forget about it. Okay, so, let me see if I can say this right. Chautauqua. Okay, so back in 1881, when I was 18, I went to my first Chautauqua, which is common in rural America. It's adult education in the form of intellectual and spiritual assemblies. And it was at Sylvan Lake in Rome, Indiana, which is like about an hour north of Route 30, if you're going east from Valpo, you know. There's a lot of lakes there. It's Sylvan Lake. So the first time I went, I enjoyed it. And then 3 years later, our family, well anyhow, I was in this town, and I tripped on the grate, on the sidewalk, and I cracked my skull. I fell down, I cracked my skull. They had to shave my head. See, my hair's real short there. I had to have stitches. I had a concussion, and it took me all winter, and then I finally recovered from my brain injury. And the following summer, I went to my second Chautauqua with my short hair plastered on top of my head, using a cane to steady myself. Donning a necklace made out of daisies, my father insisted, for modesty's sake, and that's when I attracted the attention of my future husband. He could not believe this stately woman. I was like 21. And so he started sending me letters. Mr. Charles Porter. He surprised me by writing to me, expressing his adoration. Well, I wrote back. Some say that's when my life really took on a Cinderella quality. So now that I'm an adult, I'll show you my husband. He was older. He was a pharmacist in Largo, and he had a little bank for his money in the drugstore, and then everybody else is like, well, Mr. Porter's got a bank. You know, he's got a safety deposit box for him. So he became the banker in town. So he was a pharmacist and a banker. So she wasn't hurting for money yet. I wasn't hurting for money after that. Okay. So in 1886, I was 25. I married Charles Porter and moved to a town called Geneva, which you can remember because that's my name, Geneva. Geneva. Okay, and that's still a little bit south of Fort Wayne. Then 1 year later, we had our only daughter, and as Gene Stratton-Porter, I did sketch her. She was a very lovely girl. We remained close our whole life. And this is us. See, well, I called him Mr. Mr. Porter. That's what I always called him. Mr. Porter's out there fishing. And I'm looking at nature. And that's my daughter playing with a turtle. She had all kinds of animals in her little zoo. She had garter snakes, turtles, 6 mice, and a pair of alligators. And one time she had a rattler crept between her feet, but luckily she knew how to keep perfectly still until it left. So, okay. Now to show you my Cinderella life. From 1893 to 1895, I designed and had constructed, using the Forest Building from 1893, it's World's Fair in Chicago. I used the Forest Building as a model. That's kind of blurry, isn't it? Oh well, it just is, I guess. Let's see, the home is built without metal nails. So what does that mean? Wood? Yeah, wood nails, okay. And there were 25 trees supporting the wraparound porch. I saw the photograph that somebody brought us. And I titled it The Limberlost Cabin. I wanted to renovate the one that I grew up at, but it was gone. And so was a lot of the swamp because people were cutting down wood, the trees. I filled this with Queen Anne's style furniture also. Okay, so that's what it looks like. If you go, you can go there. It is now an Indiana State Museum. How many of you been to there? Oh my gosh! So I'm speaking to the choir. Okay, all right. You can see. So you know, this photograph was with the Indiana Historical Society. So I mean, I just Googled and there they were. Okay, and then here's what it looks like inside. There's that picture that was. And then I took that one of his off because somebody said he looks like a predator. Okay, and then these are my materials for when I'm out and about. You know, I have to like wear a hat, you know, and collect things and take pictures. Okay, so this is interesting. When I was in Geneva and there was our new house was built, a fire burned 30 buildings. Am I talking too much?
No.
I'm okay? All right. Okay, just raise your hand if you've had enough, okay? I did such a great job organizing a fire brigade that in a local newspaper it reported I would have been a great fire chief if they had a fire department.
What if?
And I asked one of the people, I'm like, why are you using milk to put out the fire? And he said the water was too hot. You know, you can tell I wasn't working with a great group. My home was the most prominent building in town at the time, and it still is today. It's still great if you go there. So I had to rely on my own resources to protect my house. Okay, now this next slide shows when I wrote my first article. I went into a hat shop, a millinery shop, and I bought a hat, and then I borrowed the scissors and cut all the feathers off. 1900, so I was, what is 1960? Anyhow, whatever I was, I forget. So then I submitted an article to protest the inhuman use of birds for hats. The article was entitled "A True Millinery Experience," and it was in Recreation magazine. I criticized James Audubon's bloody work in that article about his practice of killing birds in order to paint them. Okay. So then I wrote a short story about a murdered cardinal. You can tell I was not happy about this kind of thing. In 1902, 2 years later, 12 years after my father's death. I accomplished his dream of having an author in the family, but ironically he wasn't alive to see his dream become a reality. In 1 month I expanded my first story, which equates bird songs with famous tunes. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. And turned it into a novel, my first novel, The Song of the Cardinal. You can get these online, these books. That's what they tell me. I don't know. I don't know about that kind of technology. The last technology I knew about was a camera. Okay, so, but since the contract required my husband's signature, I was forced to reveal to him that I was a writer, which was not considered a ladylike occupation. Okay, so the next book I wrote was Freckles. And that was 2 years later, 1904, and I dedicated it to Charles, my husband, because he helped me photograph a turkey buzzard's brood. Somebody in town knew I liked to take pictures of birds, and they told me that they thought that there was some turkey buzzards that were in the forest, and it seemed like there was a nest. So we took a horse-drawn wagon to the swamp all spring and summer that year, braving the elements despite leeches, mosquitoes, mud, quicksand, and all sorts of weather, and the stench of rotting animals that these birds of prey live on. I'm understanding. He made sure I was able to photograph the eggs hatch and the fledglings fly. So there's one of my photographs. Photographed by me. Charles is modeled after people I knew. In the book, I included my Limberlost, well, I called it a cathedral. It was really a swamp, but we know it's beautiful, okay. And I'm Bird Woman in it, and my daughter Jeanette is Swamp Angel, because who couldn't be beautiful in a swamp? And the book was the first book published by Doubleday of my books. Okay, so how many of you know what that is? It's yes, very good, okay. So in 1904, I wrote a series for 6 months in Lady Holmes' Journal about what I'd done with birds, and I had 1 million readers. And R.R. Rowley, who was a prominent paleontologist, named a trilobite for me, Stratton-Porter. So there it is, maybe something like that. Okay, so, oh yeah, I was going to tell you about, in 1906 I wrote my little autobiography in the third person and my novel, A Foot at the Foot of the Rainbow. I recommend this book. This is like a triangle, a love story triangle, and in the back there is her autobiography. She didn't really write about, I didn't write much about myself because I didn't divulge those things, but this is a very good book. This one is kind of old, but I recommend it. And they called Limberlost The Foot of the Rainbow. That was his nickname. So, The Foot of the Rainbow. By the way, as I said before, these books are for sale. Okay. So, now, I must, at the risk of sounding like bragging, tell you I do no revisions, no cutting, no rewrites. I do read each new installment after dinner to my family at night, and I strongly recommend having a real audience if you want to write. I read to my animals now. Anyhow. In 1909, which is not that much farther than when I started writing in 1900, 9 years later, I wrote Girl of the Limberlost. Oh, I just have this little skinny one. And it has little teeth. You got to make sure you don't get those little prints. That's hard to read for some of us. It introduced another swamp girl. Her name is Elnora Comstock. And she earned money by selling collections of butterflies and moths. Okay, now, do you want me to read a little teeny bit by her? By me? Okay, this is the time when I do it usually, if you're not too bored. Okay. It's just a little teeny bit. This is where Elnora, this is chapter 1, Elnora goes to the high school and learns many lessons not found in her books. That's the title of chapter 1. Elnora Comstock, have you lost your senses? Demanded the angry voice of her mother. Why, mother? Don't you why mother me? You know very well what I mean. You've given me no peace until you've had your way about this going to school business. I've tried to fix you good enough, and you're ready to start, but no child of mine walks the streets of Anabasha looking like a play actress woman. You wet your hair down and comb it so it's modest and decent and then be off, or you'll have no time to find where you belong. Elnora gave one despairing glance at the white face framing a most becoming riot of red-brown hair, which she saw in the little kitchen mirror. Then she untied the narrow black ribbon and wet the comb and plastered the waving curls close to her head, bound them fast, pinned on the skimpy black hat, and opened the back door. You are so plumb daffy you're forgetting your dinner, jeered her mother. I don't want anything to eat. You'll take your dinner or you'll not take one step. Are you crazy? Almost 3 miles with no food from 6 in the morning till 6 at night. A pretty figure you'll cut if you had your way. And after I've gone and bought you a nice new pail and filled it up with lunch, especially for you. Elnora came back with a face still whiter and picked up the lunch. Thank you, Mother, goodbye. Her mother commented, I bet $1 she gets enough by night. Her mother's got a bad attitude because the day that Elnora was born, her husband drowned in quicksand in the Limberlost swamp, and he'd been seeing another woman. So her mother's very bitter about her specifically. Okay, so now this is Elnora coming to the auditorium. Remember how I showed that picture of the auditorium? Only this girl's a good student. I mean, not that I'm not a good student. Okay. Elnora stood before the entrance. Okay, so she's got all the way to school. Okay. Elnora stood before the entrance and stared into the largest room she'd ever seen in her life. The floor sloped to a yawning stage on which a band of musicians grouped around a grand piano were tuning their instruments. She had two fleeting thoughts. Number one, it was all a mistake. This is no school, but a grand display of enormous ribbon bows. And second, that she was sinking and had forgotten how to walk. Then a burst from the orchestra unnerved her, while a bevy of daintily clad, sweet-smelling things that might have been birds or flowers, or possibly gaily dressed, happy young girls, pushed her forward, and she found herself plodding across the back of the auditorium, praying for guidance to find an empty seat. Okay, so that's a little glimpse of when she got to school. She also found out she was a week late, and there were no books for her. So, and then her mother didn't give her any money. So now this is the next day. I just got little excerpts here. 4 o'clock the following morning, Elnora was shelling beans. At 6, she had fed the chickens and the pigs, swept 2 of the rooms of the cabin, built a fire, and put the kettle on for breakfast. Then she climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, where she occupied since she was a very small child, and dressed in the hated shoes and brown calico, plastered down her crisp curls, and ate what breakfast she could, pinning on her hat, and started for town. "There's no sense in you going an hour before you have to," said her mother. "I must try and discover some way to earn those books. I am perfectly positive I will not find them lying beside the road, wrapped in tissue paper and tagged with my name on it." So she goes over and tries to get the bookstore man to hold some books for her, and he says, "No, I don't know who you are, and I'm not going to do it." But she notices a little sign on another store. It said, "Wanted, butterflies and moths, see the bird woman." So this is that. Okay. She goes at lunchtime with her little pail. She eats it on the path, and then she knocks on the door, and the bird woman goes, do you have any big moths that fly mostly in the June nights?" asked the bird woman. "Yes," said Elnora, "big gray ones with reddish markings, pale blue-green, yellow with lavender, and red and yellow." "What do you mean by red and yellow?" asked the bird woman so quickly that the girl almost jumped. "Well, not exactly red," said Elnora with a tremulous voice. "A reddish yellowish brown with canary-colored spots and gray lines on their wings. How many do you have of them?" It was a quick question. "Well, I had over 200 eggs," said Elnora, "but some of them didn't hatch, and some of the caterpillars died, but there must be at least 10 perfect ones now." "Perfect? How perfect?" cried the bird woman. "I mean whole wings, no down gone, and all the legs and antenna," faltered Elnora. "Young woman, that's the rarest moth in America," said the bird woman solemnly. "If you have 100 of them, they're worth $100, according to my price list. I can use all that are not damaged." "What if they're not pinned on right?" asked Elnora. "If they are perfect, that doesn't make the slightest difference, because I know how to soften them so that I can put them in any shape that I choose. Where are they, and when can I see them?" Okay, so that was, she made a friend. And she also had some people that loved her and understood that her mom was like bitter, and they actually got her a nice wardrobe. That's what's nice about these books. There's all these really nice people, and the mother does make changes. Okay, so this is graduation day, and she's the valedictorian. And her mother didn't even have a nice dress for her. She just had a white dress, a white wash dress. She'd ironed it. And Elnora didn't even tell her she was the valedictorian because she knew it wouldn't make any difference, and the mother knew it too. Okay, so the organ begins roll, but bird woman got in contact with her daughter, Swamp Angel, who's married now, and said that Elnora could have anything in that trunk, and so they fashioned this gorgeous outfit. Okay. The organ began rolling out the march as they came in. Elnora took her place at the head of the procession, while everyone wondered secretly if they had hoped that she'd be dressed well enough, and that she would not look poor and neglected. What this radiant young creature gowned in the most recent style, her smooth skin flushed with excitement, and a rose-set coronet of red gold on her head, had to do with the girl they knew was difficult to decide. The signal was given, and Elnora began the slow march across the vestry and down the aisle. The music swelled softly, and Margaret began to sob without knowing why. Wait a minute. In a blaze of light, Elnora climbed the steps to the palm-embowered platform, crossed it, and took her place. 60 young men and women, each dressed their best way possible, followed her. There were manly, fine-looking men in that class which Elnora led. There were girls of beauty and grace, but none of them were handsomer or better dressed in a better taste than she. Okay, so that's a little bit of how great I am. Okay. So that was, I guess my third book. Okay. So I was attracting worldwide attraction, and in 1909 I also published a book called Birds of the Bible with 85 photos. By this time I'd made so much money that I went to Indianapolis on a spending spree. I bought a lavender full motor coat, a bonnet and a veil, not to mention a 17-passenger limousine, and I hired a chauffeur and went back to Geneva, and I spent a month driving around Wabash County showing off my success. The unlucky Cinder Girl had become Cinderella. And Doubleday Publishers compromised and promised to publish a novel and a nature book on alternative years. And this was quite a concession because the nature books did not sell very well, while the novels went like hotcakes. I wrote The Harvester, and this is modeled after my father. And this was on the best, let's see, what was it called from, where's The Harvester? They couldn't keep it in print. From 1912 to 1917, it was on the bestseller list, and in 1912, I had enough moths collected. See, I only saved them once they passed away. They were always alive, and then, yeah, okay. They had a short lifespan, okay. Then I made my moth book, and I was telling someone that you can see the moth book in the reference department over at Cedar Lake Crown Point Library upstairs. If you go in there, there's a, but it's not real moths, but it's a very good book. But you can't take it out of the room or I'd bring it. Okay, so, and then a year later, well, in 1913, I published Laddie, which was based on my brother who passed away when he was 19, he drowned. He was trying to save somebody in the Wabash River, and he wasn't that strong. But it's a beautiful book if you can get it. I recommend it. Let's see, so then I had enough money, I wanted to make another book. Oh, here I am in my...
Wow.
It looks like I've been collecting some things on the side. Okay, so I wanted to build it in the Limberlost Swamp, but it just didn't look great. So I went over to Sylvan Lake, where I had many fine memories, and that's when we built Wildflower Woods. And it's also in Indiana State Museum. And each day I would write fiction in the morning, nap for an hour after lunch, work on my constitution by doing calisthenics. People might have thought I was crazy, that woman on the bridge doing jumping jacks. And then after dinner, I would discuss my new entries with my family, and I also had a secretary. And my grounds became a nature preserve for every native bird. And a pair of great owls mated and raised their young in the wildflower woods. I was 49 and did the majority of the planting. And then I collected and placed pudding stone, which I'm not really familiar, I can't remember what that is yet, still, but that's what I put in my fireplace. And there was 7 rooms, a dark room, an old English knocker on the front door, and I made a stone entry with statues of those owls. And then I have this picture, it doesn't really come in very good, but I don't know why. It shows me with a moth in my hand. And the reason why I have that there is because Kodak came to find out why my pictures turned out better than anybody else's. And when I showed them that I used a turkey platter, that's all I did. I used a turkey platter, but it was because I was so cleanly. You know, in each step and the timing and the darkness and all that, I was great at it. You know, and so they walked away and they just said she uses a turkey platter. Okay, so so then I found out that Joseph Kennedy, the father of JFK, had made, oh, here's some of my photographs. Birds. There's a kingfisher. I love those. And then here's some flowers that I did. And there's the inside of Wildflower Woods. That's where I worked. And here's my books. I had 26 between age 40 and 61. But I found out that Joseph Kennedy made a movie out of The Harvester, which really made me mad. So I moved to Hollywood. And I took my limousine with me. And I was in the process of having this built. It was the first home in Bel Air. And it was between the path, it was between 2 mountains, and it was in the path of snowy owls. And I called it Flora Aves, for flowers and birds. And then, I'm getting near the end. I don't know what the time is, but I moved to Catalina Island. And at Catalina Island, Wrigley, you know, with Wrigley gum, you know, he bought the island, okay? And nobody was allowed to have a car there, but he let me take my Jeep. And I went around there, and I'll show you wildflower. This is called Singing Waters. And there's a yeah. And behind it, it had a little fountain, and I got the pudding stones from Indiana, and then he let me go around and collect shells, and I used the shells for, I'm not sure, what did I use the shells for? Oh, my fountain, that's right, I forget. And then my daughter, Jeanette, married James Meehan, who produced the film A Girl in the Limberlost, which you can see on Google, if you Google on it, The Girl in the Limberlost. Okay, so then, here's some nice pictures of me. I was so happy, and people would say, why do you like Hollywood so much? And I would tell them, I love the people, they're creative. I look at the donut, not the hole. Have you heard of that one from, I don't know, some kind of bread, the Wonder Bread or something? Okay, so there I am fishing and collecting things. There I am. Maybe that's my fountain, I forget. And I'm collecting. Okay, so, let's see. So December of 1924, when I was only 61, my chauffeur-driven limousine collided with an out-of-control streetcar 2 blocks away from my home in LA. I was thrown out, and my chest and pelvis were crushed, and I died 2 days later. I was happiest when in nature from my birth until my untimely death, and I regret not living to see the completion of either of those 2 California houses. But I found deep satisfaction continuing to be in tune with my natural surroundings. Every waking moment of God's handiwork surrounds me then, now, and forever. And I've been criticized about my writing being sentimental, but I say my stories are true to life because most of my characters are modeled after people I know. Who says reality means being negative? A Daughter of the Land was praised by William Lyon Phelps of Yale, the bookman, who called me a public institution like Yellowstone. I am one of America's most popular novelists, best known of many Indiana authors. And like I said, there's over 10 million copies of my books in circulation in America alone. And my books express traditional values, reverence of nature, and when I passed away, a tree was planted in every Los Angeles schoolyard, and the College Women's Salon of Los Angeles used to hold an annual poetry contest in my honor. I regularly wrote a column for McCall's magazine in which I was referred to as a modern-day Moses, leading generations of Victorian women raised in parlors, cultivating a delicate image under a parasol to appreciate hard work, truth, lasting values, and a strong connection with nature. I gave shape to the dream of family love in the American home with determination and courage, and I displayed literary style with a hint of a fascinating personality. So despite the tragedies of my early life, I became a person in the forefront of the national conservation movement compared to Theodore Roosevelt, and my Indiana homes are state museums. Visit my homes, read my books, watch my movies, and see for yourself. Make a difference in our world and our future. After all, I was a late bloomer and not publishing my first novel until I was in my 40s. Thank you for your time.